Now let's go to map 1 of the battle. This is where we're going to get into the height of the fighting. Mulligan's fallen back here. He's been here for a couple hours, probably 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when they're going to move out to the attack. And move out is going to be the Union troops, all the way from Thoburn on Sandy Ridge, which is the Brigade of Wells and Ely. Now, as soon as over there, as things start to go, Eli's there. They see there's a big gap developing because Eli's kind of orienting trying to order his advance on Mulligan's right flank. But Sandy Ridge is kind of pulling away, so as they move farther south. So Crook tells Thoburn to move Ely over to the other side of the road so that he can cover Wells's left flank. Well, nothing's really going to come of that because the whole thing's going to turn into a real mess for Crook. But what it does do is Mulligan doesn't know that he's no longer going to have any troops coming forward to support his right flank. So as he's moving forward here, there's Thoburn's left brigade is not going to be there anymore. There's some skirmishers out there and things, but the most part Ely has to start moving back. And we will come back to them. So Mulligan's going to attack. He's going to get out just past the church. There used to be some woods beyond there. It's a neighborhood, probably some fences and more stone walls over there. And his men, they're going to get into a shootout with troops from Gordon's division. Probably just sharpshooters along the edge of the woods there. Now, Gordon's orders at this point, hold your position. You know, we want you to keep, they want to keep Mulligan focused out there. And the farther Mulligan and Hayes move out in that direction, the more of them are going to be killed, wounded, or captured when Breckinridge launches his attack. So Mulligan's focused in that direction. Hayes on the other side of the pike there. There was a farm over there, the McCardle farm, and that's where he starts, and he's going to start moving forward. And there's some cavalry skirmishers or somebody that's out in front of them, and they're driving them back. These guys are really falling back easily, and nobody seemed to notice or anything at that point. There was a small cavalry detachment that had been over on the hill. It's gone by then, it's left. It's one of the mysteries is what happened to the covering. There was a breakdown somewhere. Duffier had been brought back to the rear. My only guess is that maybe there was an assumption that because Avril was moving off in that direction, that was clear. We don't have the answer, but the important thing is there's no cavalry after that small detachment is driven out of there, covering Hayes' left flank. So got Mulligan engaged with Gordon straight up from the church and Barton's Woods. It was kind of a stand-up fight, but again, at one point, Mulligan's men report they're repulsing some sorties, but all those are is just designed to keep Mulligan in position out there.
Looks like we got a car coming through. Sorry to interrupt.
So what you have happening then now is we got to go with Hayes. As he's moving forward, he's going to eventually, remember the plan is he's going to kind of swing around and hit Gordon on his right flank out by the pike over here. Well, again, we know that's never going to happen. But as he's moving forward, down in the low ground in front of that ridge where I-81 is at, Breckinridge is going to give the order to advance the sharpshooters, and only about 40 yards behind them, the line of battle. 2,500, mostly Virginians, a couple hundred North Carolinians of a unit called the Thomas Legion are going to attack. These units, this is under the command of Brigadier General Gabriel Wharton. He's from the town that is now Radford, Virginia. He's a veteran of fighting against Grant at Fort Donelson in 1862. Fights a lot in West Virginia. His first major action, though, was as a brigade commander at the Battle of Newmarket, where his troops do well. I know if you go to Newmarket, it's VMI, 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 but you know, there was a lot of other guys there besides the couple hundred guys in there, and Wharton's were some that took some very heavy casualties and some very stout fighting that had occurred there. He's going to fight when they get called east to Cold Harbor. He'll be engaged there. He's fought at Snickers Gap, does well with his division there. It's his first time as a division commander. Serving under him, this Forsberg, here, this guy on the far right flank of that line, as they're going to be coming towards us. He starts off as an engineer. He's Swedish born, Augustus Forsberg. He left us an excellent journal that helps us understand a lot of things about this command in 1864 that aren't available anywhere else. Patchan in the middle is the grandfather of our World War II hero, George Patchan. So this is Colonel George Patchan in command of a brigade of Virginians here. Now the one that's on the Confederate left flank there, Smith, he had been wounded fighting against Crook in Southwest Virginia in May of 1864. He just came back to the Army. He was a lieutenant colonel in command of the 36th Virginia in May when he was wounded. He returns to the Army on July 22nd. He's now a full colonel, and he's the senior colonel in the brigade, and he's the brigade commander. More importantly, he's the son of Virginia Governor William Extra Billy Smith. So he gets kind of interesting when things really go south for Jubal early after Winchester and Fisher's Hill in the fall. Smith is writing to Robert E. Lee talking about, well, I have it on good authority from officers in Early's army that, you know, things A, B, C, D, E, F, G were wrong and that Early needed to be relieved. I'm pretty sure that was, his son was probably one of the officers who was giving him the scuttlebutt at that point. But Smith, they're going to lead this attack, get to the top of that hill, and they look down, and if these guys are lining the top of the hill right there, and this is Hayes's battle line, 2,500 Virginians are all aiming their rifles at the end into the battle flags out in front. That unit out there is Crook's regulars, the 36th Ohio. They're going to take a blistering volley. They've got a little over 300 men. They're going to lose about 120, 130 killed. Almost half the men will be killed and wounded there. And again, these guys are veterans. Antietam, Chickamauga, Chattanooga. They've been in some real knockdown, bloody slugfest of battles. Captain Major Jewett Palmer, he will be wounded shortly into the battle, but he wrote in his journal, a journal that he wrote in while he was in an ambulance wagon, that was the bloodiest, hottest spot that he stood on in the war. Just to give you, now it's not as big a battle as that, but at that point over there, what those troops experienced in Breckinridge and Wharton's attack is, that's how hot the combat was. They're not going to stand long, maybe about 5 minutes or so. They're going to attempt, but men are falling left and right. Most of their casualties are going to occur there. So they're going to start peeling off and retreating back up towards the pike. Then you've got the 23rd Ohio. You know, it's like dominoes. So 3 of Hayes's 4 regiments are going to be very quickly, you know, the first 2 take heavier losses. The third one, it's going to see what's happening, and it's falling back in confusion. The 4th one, next to the Valley Pike, is the 13th West Virginia Infantry, and it's going to fall back. If you look straight out there, you see that brick building at the end of the driveway. Over in that vicinity was an apple orchard on the McCardle farm. The 13th West Virginia is going to fall back, and the rookie colonel is going to lead them, and they're going to make a stand out there for an extended period of time. Now, one of the things that happens, big picture here at the battle, if this was a cartoon, George Crook would have a light bulb turning on above his head, probably when that first volley goes off. And Crook, again, who's typically a very capable officer, realizes there's a problem, so he orders Thoburn to fall back to the south end of Winchester to cover the rear guard. He sees that it's not a good situation here.
Oh, that's fine.
Where is the Confederate fire coming from that's feeding these guys down?
First on the ridge with I-81, and then as they retreat,
Behind
they're going to be following. Kind of envision a line of battles lined up on I-81, and they're going to keep coming this way. Now, one of the key things that's going to happen here is Mulligan next. Well, he's going to see that everything's falling back, so his two brigades are going to fall back to this line here along Pritchard's Lane. He, at this point, is up on the high ground near where the museum building is at, the white building behind the house there, the modern building. Modern for probably the 1940s anyway. Anyway, he's up there on the high ground. Now, Thoburn's pulled out. He's not aware of that, what's going on there. And skirmishers from Ramseur's division start coming across those fields that are now wooded over there in that corner. And the 10th West Virginia under Major Thomas Harris starts firing at these guys. Well, these Confederate skirmishers, they were wearing blue coats. It's a deceptive practice. And they're coming across, and Mulligan says, "Hold your fire, you're firing at friends." Well, then these guys start shooting back at them, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, go ahead and fire." But at that point, it's already too late, because behind them is you've got Ramseur's line of battle coming in. Thoburn had left a skirmish line out there to cover his withdrawal, and some of the Confederates charge it in front, but at the same time, Mudwall Jackson's men charge behind that skirmish line, charging down from Sandy Ridge. And this is all happening on the backside of the Pritchard house there. And they're going to capture about 100 Federals that had been left behind there. And so Thoburn's going to ride along his battle line. He's known the men of the 10th West Virginia and the 23rd Illinois for a long time. And he's riding along, stand firm, brave Virginians. He gets down here into this area, here, and where those trees are at is the 23rd Illinois. Beyond is some West Virginians and Pennsylvanians of Colonel Linton's brigade, and he's rallying the men. There's battle going on. One of the things that's going to save these guys is French-born Colonel Alfred Duffier. His cavalry is posted to the rear. We're going to switch over to the next map here. And you see there on map 2, you know, things are going to start to develop here on the battle as they're moving forward. And you can see these brigades move forward, and troops just all along the pike are going to have to fall back to avoid this. It looks like it's going to be an utter disaster. If you're looking at the map 2 there with all of this here and all the troops falling back in confusion. Go over to map 3. You're going to see Duffier, Brigadier General Duffier, French-born. He was a guy, he wasn't always the most popular with his men. At one point, on one battlefield, one soldier remembered, he ordered him to charge into the teeth of a strong Confederate position, and the men looked at him questioningly, and Duffier said, "Hey, you only die once." He just wasn't... and the same soldier remembered that during the march, sometimes when he would, because he was French, when he would walk by, men would call out "frog eater" from the ranks and other things less respectful than pertinent, as the soldier recalled it. But anyway, Duffier is going to take a small portion of his command. He's going to charge into the flank of Wharton's division. You know, if you think about this, they're chasing Hayes's men, and they got their sights set, and they get surprised. And so they're going to disrupt those regiments over there, and they're going to kind of have to stop there, turn, reorganize troops to drive off the cavalry. That's going to allow hundreds of Hayes's men and this artillery in the 54th PA to escape. It appears at this point of the battle that some additional Union artillery is brought up to the front briefly. But one of the things that is important to note here is Colonel Forsberg, the commander of that brigade over there, he noted, he said, if the Union infantry had behaved as bravely as their artillery, it might have been a different outcome. I don't think so, that's true, but he's trying to compliment the artillerists. He was talking about they were firing shells and they were taking out files of men. They'd hit the man in front and the back. He talked about the accuracy and how long the artillery would stay in position before they withdrew from here. So it's there. Over through there, through the pines then, as this thing starts to resurge, Lytton's brigade is going to withdraw. You're going to have Hayes's men going up to the top of the hill. Mulligan is going to be shot in the thigh. When he's riding back and forth behind the 23rd Illinois, he stands up in his stirrups and is cheering his men on. One of the things that's happened is by now Gordon's sharpshooters have come across the field here, Georgians, some of them lying down in the stream bank. Over here we have Virginians coming forward from Hoffman's brigade. The 10th West Virginia is fragmenting on the right flank from Ramseur's division's attack. It's falling up the hill, stopping sporadically the fight, but it's continually outflanked to the west and cannot find a tenable position to hold. When Mulligan's shot in the leg, his brother-in-law, Nugent, is going to ride over to him, assist him down. Color sergeant's going to come over, give the big burly guy. I always view this guy as the sergeant from the John Wayne Western movies out there. You know, the guy that always had the whiskey in his flask and swearing and stuff. And Mulligan, this guy, is, goddamn, we're going to stay with you, Colonel. And Mulligan's like, Sergeant, don't swear. And then he starts, you know, he's very severe wounds, telling them to leave him behind and save themselves. The situation's not good. You know, eventually it comes down to the men of the 23rd Illinois are about all that's left, and they're here for Mulligan at this point. The West Virginians have gone on, the other brigades on. Hayes has some men on top of the hill, and the 13th West Virginia is still fighting in that cornfield, apple orchard, holding them off there. But if they don't move, they're going to be surrounded and cut off. Well, Mulligan, as they're carrying him down, he's going to take 2 more bullets, one to the shoulder and one to the torso, and they're mortal wounds. And you know, he's going to order the men, lay me down and save the flag. The sergeant, when his nephew took the flag over from the sergeant, his nephew's going to be shot in the head. His brother-in-law is shot in the head and killed instantly. I keep saying his nephew because his nephew's the one who wrote the story of a lot of this happening. And that's Martin Russell, and he'll be back here and later on in the story. So Mulligan's going to be left behind. Yes?
Do they just leave the dead where they lie?
Yeah, when you're being shot at,
okay.
you know.
I know it's a silly question.
Yeah, but no, when you're fleeing a battlefield and you're under fire like that, being overwhelmed at that point, but they were staying with him. One of the Confederates from Smith, he was probably coming out from that area of the townhouses. He talked about seeing, they were waving the flag and the small concentration of men, and he talked about how all the Confederates, that clump of men, they took fairly heavy casualties. It was a small unit, but they took a large percentage of casualties because he tried to stick with him in there. And then they're going to hightail it up the hill. While that scene's playing out, Rutherford B. Hayes has got the remnants of his brigade on top of the hill with the artillery. And he sees the 13th West Virginia. If they don't pull out of there, they're going to get cut, overwhelmed, and captured on both their flanks. There's more cars coming down there. And what happens to them at that point is he orders, future President Rutherford B. Hayes turns to a young 20-some-year-old staff officer, future President William McKinley, and orders McKinley to ride down the hill and order the colonel of the 13th West Virginia to get the heck out of there before they get cut off and captured en masse. And McKinley, as he's riding down the hill, probably right over where those trees are at, I tell you there's Confederate artillery fire from the ridge where Breckinridge attacked. There's now Confederate fire coming from the south. and these shells are hitting the dirt, exploding, kicking up dirt, smoke. And there was one that landed in a way that created smoke. And they couldn't see McKinley from the top of the hill anymore. And they assumed that when they saw that big smoke cloud, dirt cloud, they assumed he was dead. And they're like, oh man, this young man of such promise is gone. But then they saw him emerge out of the cloud of smoke and continue on with his mission and extricate the 13th West Virginia, which would form the core of the Union rear guard from this side of the battlefield until they got back to Winchester and joined Thoburn's division. Confederates are going to overrun this position. Georgians of Gordon's division will find Mulligan here. They will take him to the house. I mentioned earlier that word of his kind treatment of citizens in the eastern part of West Virginia was well known among some of the men who had wives and children living there. And right away when they heard it was Mulligan, they sent in a surgeon over there to see what could be done, and it was a mortal wound. They knew that. And Mulligan will spend he will die within 48 hours of receiving his wound inside of the Pritchard house. One of the things that would occur is, again, mentioned Mulligan's dedication to his religion, and there was a Catholic chaplain with the Louisiana Brigade, a lot of Irish and French, so their chaplain was a priest. He came and he gave him last rites inside of the Pritchard house. At one point, the Pritchards are...
So that's a Confederate that gave him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a Confederate priest. And at one point, the Pritchards tried to give him some brandy to ease his pain, and he says, I never drank that before, and I'm not going to start now. And he just, he asked the Pritchards to tell his wife to raise their children, that he was a true patriot and dedicated soldier to his country, and a dedicated Christian to Christ, and to raise his children as God-fearing beings, and tell her he missed her. And so that was his last message before he died. Now, coming back to Mrs. Mulligan, I mentioned she's at Cumberland, and she's going to get down here on the 27th to Winchester. Now, at the time, she did not know that he was dead. But when they get to Martinsburg, West Virginia, there's a famous staff officer from Stonewall Jackson who is now on early staff, Sandy Pendleton. Some of you read Civil War stuff may have heard about him. But Pendleton was well known in the Confederate Army, very like Nugent, Mulligan's staff officer, who was killed here, about the same age, young man. And he pulled Lieutenant Martin Russell when they were at the Potomac River. He drove the wagon that brought Mrs. Mulligan south here to Winchester. And some soldiers had told them when they met them that, oh yeah, he's alive and he's in the house, as they were journeying here. But by the time they got to Martinsburg, Pendleton pulls Russell inside and said, he's not going to be alive when you get there. Just, you're going to have to prepare. So when they arrive in Winchester, Russell leaves her at the house of a Unionist, and he rides down here, and as he's coming up the wagon up the driveway, they're actually preparing a small burial service for Mulligan here. So instead, he's put in the wagon, taken back up to the house. Mrs. Mulligan comes out, faints, covers, spends some time just gazing upon her husband. He would be taken north and on trains to Chicago. And for a guy who's lost to history, the whole city of Chicago came out, thousands of people. They had him in one of the main civic halls. They had him, he wasn't laid out by that time, he was in a sealed metallic casket. But they had a big banner above the casket that said, "Lay me down and save the flag." And so they had a big funeral mass the next day and a procession out to the cemetery. And he was kind of largely forgotten. It was even about 20 years before they put a marker on his grave in Chicago. But if you're Mrs. Mulligan here, you didn't lose just your husband. You lost your little brother. He was killed. And, you know, Russell tried to find out. For years after the war, they would have handbills put up. They'd come out here and visit to see if they could find anything about where he may have been buried. But as far as we know, he could be buried right out here. Most likely, he's probably one of those hundreds of unknown Union soldiers buried at the National Cemetery.
So we found a couple sources on the disinterment and reinterment of the Union and Confederacy. If you haven't heard about our mass grave site, not related to this battle. Between 15 and 30 Union bodies were taken off of this property, just the Pritchard property, within 2 years after the war. Only 2 of them were identified by unit and name.
Yeah.
I'm sure Nugent was one of those couple dozen.
Yeah, I'm guessing, you know, I remember he was hit in the head. I don't know, you don't know how that could have unidentified. Plus, nobody was left that could identify you. Mulligan died. But anyway, so her grief, she never got over that. But she had 3 daughters. Is the picture still up of them? If you go in the visitor center, you'll see a picture.
In the house.
It's in the house, yeah. It's a picture of Mrs. Mulligan and the 3 daughters sitting in chairs, and on the table next to them is a portrait of Colonel Mulligan sitting there. So, you know, she honored his wishes and things there. But he was also at the same time, again, he was inexperienced coming in here, and he wanted to see battle and be part of that. And, you know, it didn't work out well for him here. Now, let's go back to the big picture. The Confederates overrun this. They advance to Winchester. Crook, again, like I said, Crook very confidently has a rear guard set up, and there will be a panic because Averill's cavalry, they got set on that mission on the Front Royal Road. Another car coming.
Wave them through.
Yeah, they by the time they start getting down there, they don't run into just 1 brigade of cavalry. They run into 3 brigades of Confederate cavalry, about over 3,000 men towards them. There's about 1,800 Federals under Averill's command. And coming up behind that cavalry is Robert Rhodes' division of about 3,500 to 4,000 men strong. So that cavalry panics and races to the rear in confusion. They're going to get well behind the rear guard action, and they're going to tell the wagoneers that everything's lost. The army's been destroyed at Kernstown. They captured all of our artillery, and it's just going to create a panic. But all this is happening like a mile and a half behind a solid rear guard that Crook had established that was falling back from Winchester. And about 80 of the wagons were set on fire by the Teamsters. There's one story, and this story is post-war, but it's also in letters that soldiers wrote home the day after the battle. Some of the cannoneers, they cut loose, they abandoned their guns and ran off. And there was one artillery battery of 2 guns that was just flying down the pike in confusion amidst this panic with no riders on the horses. And it's going to until they crash into a stone wall lining the pike. But then Colonel Rutherford B. Hayes and some West Virginia cavalrymen will carry it off northward to Martinsburg and bring it off the field. Now, after this battle was fought, there's a famous memoir, one of Jackson's foot cavalry, by a soldier named John Worsham. He called this the most easily won battle of the war. Wow. Well, it was Crook misreading the situation, and all the Confederates put the pressure on the flanks. They didn't have to make any desperate charges across the field against Union soldiers behind stone walls, and it collapsed. And all you have to do to bear out that is 1,200 Union casualties, about half of them captured. A few of these happened on the 23rd as well. The Confederates, there's a guy doing a casualty study. When I did my book, it came out in 2007. I think I had around 150 to 200 men. He's getting close to 300. So basically, it's a four Union casualties for every single Confederate casualty. And most of those, Wharton's division will lose most of those because they're coming in and doing the final attack. And Gordon would be next. So what do you do now? You're Jubal Early. What's your next move? Well, Early really wants to stir things up, ensure that there's going to be troops coming back out here to the valley and not posing a threat to Robert E. Lee at Richmond. Again, remember, the main game is Petersburg. It's Lee versus Grant. It's not holding Winchester in the valley or anything. This is a diversion. And while Early, as a commander, understands that role, he does good. A couple months from now, he's going to decide that he's got to hold the Northern Valley, and that's not going to be a good thing for him. But that tour will be September 19th at the 3rd Winchester Battlefield. Anyway, so Early is irate. One of the things that's happened since he withdrew from Washington and has been here and Union troops reoccupied Northern Virginia, they burned the homes of the Lee family around Charleston, the Hunter family in Shepherdstown, and the Bodler family as well. Bodler was famous. He was a lawyer and he wrote reports for Stonewall Jackson, and very close in the Confederate congressman. So Hunter, the departmental commander, had sent out cavalry detachments to do all this. Specifically because of the burnings of those three homes, he's going to send John McCausland with nearly 3,000 cavalrymen north to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, with orders to extract, I think it's like $200,000 in gold or $500,000 in greenbacks as ransom for Hunter's depredations in the valley. If not, we're going to burn the town. Well, Chambersburg, they had experienced Confederate occupations before. Both times when Lee was at Antietam, McClellan's ride around Stuart's ride around McClellan after the Antietam campaign, Gettysburg campaign, where Lee's men were on the best behavior, and Chambersburg banks learned the drill. They get word of approaching Confederates. What do? All the money and gold is put on the trains and sent to the vaults in Harrisburg. So that's what happens. The people are going to try and buy some time. McCausland senses they're stalling. He orders a Colonel Peters, commander of the 21st Virginia Cavalry, he was a college professor before this, and he wanted no part of this blatant making war and destroying a whole town that was, again, mostly women and children and elderly at that point. He refuses, but there was a guy named Major Harry Gilmore, commander of the 2nd Maryland Battalion, which was kind of a more roguish version of Mosby's Raiders. He had no problem, and he comes in and he leads the burning there, and they burn Chambersburg to the ground. Hundreds of homes and businesses are destroyed. McCausland, Averell's cavalry will eventually track him down. That happens on July 30th, and on August 7th, McCausland's camped at Moorfield, West Virginia. He's going to get hit in another surprise attack by Averell, who's going to capture about 500 Confederates, 4 pieces of artillery. And this is a devastating blow because these were the 2 best and largest brigades in Early's cavalry. And not only did the men who were lost there, but because of the demoralization throughout the whole raid, a lot of these horsemen, their home territory was in the mountains of West Virginia and Southwest Virginia. Instead of coming back to the valley with their commands, they went home. So Early probably lost about a third of those 2 cavalry divisions between desertion and that battle there. So that's going to come back to haunt him as the campaign goes on. But Early is highly successful at, what does Grant do? He orders 6th Corps and 19th Corps under Horatio Wright out to Frederick, Maryland. One of the things that George Crook did, is he made sure that when he fell back across the Potomac River, he's going to block the gaps of South Mountain so that Jubal Early can't show up in front of Washington, D.C. or at Baltimore, as he did in his first raid at the beginning, and it culminated at Washington on July 12th. So, but they've stripped the Potomac River and those cavalry went across. So Early, Robert E. Lee, he's now invested 10,000 men from his army that left Cold Harbor in June of 1864. And in early August, Grant's going to send the 2 divisions of cavalry out here. With that, with the 19th Corps, when they're all out here at full force, that's 30,000 men that Jubal Early has pulled away from operations against Lee at Richmond and Petersburg. That's the big picture there. And so for every man that Lee invested with Early to come out to Western Virginia and Maryland, 3 Yankees were sent out here. And it's not a stretch to say if Grant had 30,000 more men, I don't think Richmond and Petersburg would have lasted through 1864. I think Jubal Early, those 10,000 men with him, accomplished more here than if they would have been extending lines down at Richmond and Petersburg. So Early understood the game. Unfortunately, he's going to lose sight of that and start trying to hold territory, and you know that will be his downfall against Sheridan in the fall, the beginning of it. So, any questions?
Was the Confederate artillery used at all, and where was it positioned at?
Yeah, the Confederate artillery, the primary, that ridge where I-81 was when Breckinridge set up there, if you look on your map, you can see they set up a dozen guns under Captain Major William McLaughlin's artillery battalion over there. I've also documented there was one down by, there's a used car dealership that I mentioned, that was an artillery position for some of the Second Corps artillery. There may have been some artillery on Sandy Ridge at some point, perhaps after as Ramseur's clearing. It's not sure, but they definitely had strong artillery presence along the pike and east of the pike, and it really makes itself felt right around here in this area as the Union retreat. And then the retreat's such a fast thing until they get to Winchester. They don't have a lot of opportunities there. And it's mostly at that point, Confederate cavalry's taken over the pursuit there. And they never close in too closely, but they did a good job contributing to the victory here, covering Wharton's assault.
You mentioned prisoners several different times. What happened to prisoners?
Well, the prisoners here, they marched south to Stanton, took them to Richmond, and then most of them went deep south prisons. So I don't know, Andersonville will close later in the year. Some of them, just from looking, this is just a handful of guys. I've seen some of these guys are going to end up being freed from, I think, Salisbury, North Carolina in 1865. But yeah, and the conditions in the prison, you know, many men who go to prisons, you know a lot of them died in prison, especially if you were wounded and had been taken to prison. Is there a question here?
Yeah, did Lieutenant Moore, after he made sure Mulligan was moving forward, did he go back to Crook, or was he around here for the...
Well, Crook's going to come forward here, yeah, and probably, Crook's probably over there with Thoburn, you know, I'm not sure. The only documentation is basically Hayes is telling the story of the meeting with Mulligan, and it's just his only role that we're aware of is reiterating the orders to go forward.
Why are there so many battles in this area? What's the strategy? Is it just a good place to meet up and
Well,
fight?
Winchester, you know, just like today, you know, first of all, Winchester it was really tied into Baltimore agriculturally, a lot with Baltimore and Washington. You know, it didn't have a railroad in it, but you know, in this particular spot, it's, as Steve had mentioned earlier, how far you could see from up there on the hill. This is a natural defensive position, and so Union troops that they're occupying Winchester, it's the leading town of the northern Shenandoah Valley here, and so it's natural you're going to want to occupy this, and this you're going to have outposts down here because of this dominating position. Again, we've talked about 3 battles here. There's actually a 4th that's going to happen in August here. On August 17th, probably saw more casualties than the one that was related to Second Winchester.
When's that tour?
Yeah. We'll have to plan that one.
We want to learn
August
more.
17th.
I looked in your book, it's mentioned in there. So
Yeah.
there's a big skirmish that happened.
Yeah.
But that was fighting around Front Royal, right?
Well, Front Royal happens the day before
So it's
with
after that.
Custer and
Yeah.
Wofford but yeah, basically Sheridan comes down, and he learns Confederate reinforcements are arriving, so he's fallen back, and there's a massive rear guard action, you know, all the way from here out Sandy Ridge. They're trying to burn the house at Sandy Ridge, or the barn at Sandy Ridge, and Confederate cavalry saves it. But, yeah.
The Winchester changed hands, from my understanding, 73 times.
Yeah, that's, yeah, it's
Did a
up
lot
there.
of those happen all at once, like in these major battles, or was it?
But
all
that
separate?
includes times where you had a Union cavalry detachment that rode into town in the morning. The Confederate cavalry attachment captures them or charges in the afternoon and drives them out.
Okay. So a lot of that back and
They've
forth
documented a
happened
few
during
times where,
these major battles.
because there's always troops here. So we've mentioned, you know, several times that there's been engagements, you know, and there's even more battles, but there's always troops here, and you know, Union always has a presence on the B&O Railroad at Martinsburg, and there's, you know, always that back and forth. Most of the time, though, it's not a major battle resulting in the changeover of hands.
Sometimes it happens 2 or 3 times in one day.
One day, yeah.
And one of the authors, Gary Elkenbarger, says that with a flag over the courthouse changed, meaning more permanent occupation, 13 times.
Because the diarist lived right across from the courthouse. And so he's writing every time she thinks it changes. So I think she's the one that said 72. But it's a lot.
Yeah.
What's your background? Like, how do you get those writing books about the Civil War? Like,
Well, I got interested in it when I was going to James Madison University.
okay.
So I've written 7 books now.
With all the names, colonels and generals, you think Kernstown would have been named after one of them? How did Kernstown get there?
Oh, Kernstown was the name before the Kearns family.
Goes way
Just-
back, yeah.
Yeah.
Back to the 1700s.
Nobody changed it.
Some of the Kearns family have shown up here.
Yeah.
So,
All right, well, thank you so much for coming out. I've signed a bunch of books in there that are already signed. I can sign a few more in there. I'll get some of the ones I didn't sign before I take off. But we have we had a family friend pass together, and I head back east to Fauquier for a memorial service this afternoon. So,
If anybody wants a house tour or continued battlefield tours for the rest of the afternoon, we'll be here. Just grab one of us docents and we'll take you around.
do you have a question, sir?
When are we going to meet again?
every July.
Every July.
Well,
When's your next tour?
September?
September 19th, look at Shenandoah Valley Battlefield Foundation. I'm going to be at the 3rd Winchester Battlefield. We have, there's like,
Beside Millbrook.
yeah, we're going to be meeting at several different spots on the battlefield.
541
and they're
Red Bud
identified on
Road.
the webpage.
541 Red Bud Road.
First one's at the Alabama Monument by the hotel.
North Carolina
North
Monument
Carolina,
on
I got it,
Route
yep.
7. there, where
Yeah.
there's the wood lot that's there, and we'll be touring that area there. Then we'll be out at the Alabama Monument, and then over with the Confederate artillery position on Red Mud Road. But yeah, September 19th, it's on their webpage.